In February of 2025, President Trump announced plans for a massive new ballroom adjacent to the White House. The scale of this project is staggering. We're talking about 90,000 square foot ballroom that's larger than the entire executive residence, which is 55,000 square feet. By October 23rd, 2025, just this past Thursday, the demolition was complete. The east wing of the White House, a structure with its own history and significance, was gone. So how did we get from announcement to demolition in just 8 months? By bypassing every normal safeguard. Welcome back to Ethos Trek. In this podcast, we usually explore the ethical dimensions of current events and ask the hard questions about power, process, and principle. I'm Sarah, and today we're diving into a story that's literally reshaping one of America's most iconic buildings, the White House. What happens when normal rules don't apply? What happens when oversight bodies are bypassed, preservation laws are ignored, and a historic structure is demolished in a matter of months? And perhaps most importantly, what does this tell us about the state of our democratic institutions? Today, we're examining the Trump administration's controversial White House ballroom project, the demolition of the East Wing, and what it reveals about executive power in 2025. Let's start with the basics. The White House isn't just any building. It's a national historic landmark, a symbol of American democracy. And technically, it belongs to all of us. So when a president wants to make changes, there's supposed to be a process. Historically, any significant alterations to the White House go through several layers of review. The National Capital Planning Commission, or NCPC, reviews federal development projects in Washington, D.C. The Commission of Fine Arts provides advisory review on design and aesthetics. And the Committee for the Preservation of the White House offers recommendations specifically focused on protecting the building's historic character. Now, these bodies don't always have binding authority. But here's the key. Past administrations have voluntarily submitted major projects for their review. This has formed the preservation framework that has guided White House alterations for decades. It's a norm, an expectation of how things should be done. There is also legal framework. Executive Order 11593, issued back in 1971, directs federal agencies to consult with the U.S. Interior Department before altering historic structures. Executive orders can be altered after the president that issues them leaves office, but I found no such altering orders. And there are laws like the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 that require federal agencies to identify and evaluate historic properties before undertaking projects that might affect them. To give you a sense of how this normally works, during Trump's first term, when he wanted to add a tennis pavilion to the White House grounds, it went through the standard approval process. Construction wrapped up in late 2020 after proper review. He knows what the process is. He knows what he's supposed to do. He's done it before. He just didn't. So that's the system as designed. Checks, balances, transparency, consultation. Now keep that in mind as we move forward. Now let's talk about what actually happened. In February of 2025, President Trump announced plans for a massive new ballroom adjacent to the White House. The initial price tag, $100 million, to be funded by private donors. The scale of this project is staggering. We're talking about 90,000 square foot ballroom that's larger than the entire executive residence, which is 55,000 square feet. Trump said it would accommodate roughly 1,000 people compared to the current East Room's capacity of 200. But here's where the rhetoric gets kind of wishy-washy. On July 31st, Trump stated that the ballroom wouldn't interfere with the current building. It will be near, but not touching it. The implication was clear that this would be an addition, not a demolition. A supplement to the White House, not a replacement of any part of it. Fast forward to October 22nd. The New York Times reports something very different. The entire East Wing would be demolished. An anonymous White House official told the Times this approach would be, quote, cheaper and more structurally sound, unquote. Think about the shift. From near it but not touching it to we're tearing down the entire East Wing. And by October 23rd, 2025, just this past Thursday, the demolition was complete. The East Wing of the White House, a structure with its own history and significance, was gone. So how did we get from announcement to demolition in just 8 months? By bypassing every normal safeguard. According to reporting, Trump's project bypassed the standard approval process for White House renovations. The White House began demolishing part of the East Wing despite not having construction approval from the federal agency that oversees such projects. The very same National Capital Planning Commission I mentioned earlier. Now, here's an interesting detail. Will Scharf, the White House staff secretary, currently chairs the NCPC. The commission is comprised of 3 Trump appointees, members of federal agencies, and D.C. representatives. So there's a clear conflict of interest in the oversight structure itself. It gets more concerning when we look at the secrecy surrounding the project. Some workers have signed non-disclosure agreements about the ongoing construction. The Treasury Department, which has offices that directly face the East Wing, instructed employees not to share photos of the demolition. Why the secrecy? Why the NDAs? If this project is being done properly, with appropriate oversight and following all the legal requirements, what's there to hide? Now, there are good reasons for NDAs, and they aren't that uncommon. However, given this administration's refusal to be transparent, these are legitimate questions. Remember that claim from the White House official that tearing down the East Wing was necessary because it would be cheaper and more structurally sound? Charles F. Blazes, a San Francisco-based architect known for preservation work, challenged that claim directly. He said, quote, that may save you time, but it certainly isn't true that you can't strengthen existing structures and bring them up to current code performance. We do that all the time, unquote. Blazes went on to note what he found most surprising, quote, all this is happening so fast without time for any experienced or competent professional to actually do what's necessary on paper before they start work, unquote. Think about that. This isn't just about whether you can tear something down. It's about whether you should and whether you're following the proper process to make that determination. There are also serious engineering complications that don't seem to have been fully addressed. The East Wing substructure overlaps the White House service tunnels and hardened communication corridors built during the Truman reconstruction. This is likely to complicate foundation, isolation, and vibration control for any new structure. They aren't small details. These are fundamental engineering questions that typically take months or years to study properly, but in this case, the building was demolished before any of these questions could be adequately answered. So, With all these concerns, has anyone tried to stop it? Yeah. A Virginia couple, Charles and Judith Verhees, filed an emergency motion in federal court seeking to halt the project. They're alleging violations of multiple federal preservation and planning laws. Specifically, the lawsuit claims the Trump administration violated the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 by not identifying and evaluating the historic property, assessing the project's effects, and consulting with the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation and the D.C. State Historic Preservation Office before the project proceeded. They also claim violations of the National Capital Planning Act of 1952 by refusing to submit final plans for the ballroom construction to the Planning Commission. Now, are these criminal violations? Probably not, at least not in the traditional sense. These are administrative and preservation laws, not criminal statutes. But they're laws nonetheless, laws designed to protect our shared national heritage and ensure proper governmental process. The real question is, if a president can ignore these laws, what other laws become optional? Where's the line? Let's talk about cost, because this number keeps growing. Trump initially announced the project with a $100 million price tag. Then it went up to $200 million. Now it's at $300 million. That's a threefold increase in just months. And remember, this is supposedly being funded by private donors, which raises its own ethical questions. Ethics experts and Democrats say they're eager to know whether the private donors behind this $300 million ballroom are poised to receive any benefits in return. Are we talking about wealthy individuals or corporations gaining access, influence, or favorable treatment in exchange for their donations? We don't know, because there hasn't been transparency about who these donors are or what, if anything, they might expect in return. This is the kind of question that would normally be scrutinized by congressional oversight, by ethics watchdogs, by the press. But in an environment where normal processes are bypassed, where NDAs are required, where information is tightly controlled, how do we get answers? So let's step back and look at the bigger picture. What does this particular controversy tell us? First, it shows how democratic norms can erode when they're not backed by enforceable legal mechanisms. The voluntary consultation process that guided White House renovations for decades can simply be ignored if a president chooses to do so. Second, it reveals the limitations of our preservation laws. Even when laws exist, if the violator is the executive branch itself, enforcement becomes complicated. Who holds the president accountable when oversight bodies are staffed by presidential appointees? Third, it raises questions about transparency and public trust. When a project affecting a national landmark is shrouded in secrecy, when rhetoric doesn't match reality, when costs balloon without explanation, public trust is undermined. And finally, it forces us to confront a fundamental question about executive power. Are presidents bound by the same rules as everyone else? Or does the office itself place them above certain laws and norms? The White House belongs to all of us. It's not just the president's house. It's the people's house. We, the people, are the people who own that house. And when decisions about its future are made without proper oversight, without transparency, without following established legal processes, we all lose something. The White House ballroom story is still developing, and I expect it will for quite some time. As of this recording, the East Wing is gone. The lawsuit is pending, and construction presumably continues. We'll be watching and we'll bring updates as this story unfolds. But I want to hear from you. What do you think about this particular controversy? Is this an acceptable use of executive power or a dangerous precedent? Should there be stronger legal protections for historic structures, even when the president wants to make changes? Comment below. Keep the conversation going. If you like this story, please poke that like button, subscribe, do all the things. It helps others see the content and more viewpoints can be added to the conversation. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep thinking critically. This is Ethos Trek. I'm Sarah, and I'll be back in a few days.